Hi everybody, Bob Gillia here again. I am starting another project that I'd like to share with you. It concerns my vacuum system in my shop. I'm down in the shop, and recently I had installed a vacuum piping system. As you can see here with the black ABS rigid piping, and then you can see the flexible hoses that go to the different pieces of equipment. So I put this in about 6 months ago, and I tied it into my shop vac right here, so which I can control with our radio frequency remote control when I'm using any of the equipment. And it's very convenient because what I can do is I have a knife gate valve on each outlet of the piping system, and I can open and close it to direct the vacuum to the particular tool I'm using that's creating the dust, and to have the maximum suction by turning off all of the other knife gates. And it's been working pretty good. The one issue that I've been having is that I had kind of quickly hooked up the hose to my table saw, and as you see, what I did was I just used one of the rigid extension pieces and kind of screwed it to a column using some hose clamps, and I positioned it so that the nozzle underneath the saw, as you can see here, is directly under the blade, and I turn that on when I'm using the saw, but it's not very effective. It only captures about 50% of the dust. This particular saw, is a Delta contractor saw, and it's designed for no dust collection at all, other than just dropping onto this angled sheet steel here, and then I had made a little dustbin for the sawdust to fall out. It works okay, but it's messy, and I have to clean this thing out constantly, and I track the dust around the shop. So my new effort here is to close the bottom off and connect this vacuum hose directly to a fitting to make it airtight, vacuum tight, and to close this back off, which is going to be a little bit of a challenge. We're going to go through that together. In addition to that hose on the bottom with the nozzle underneath the blade, I also directed one of these rather more stiff hoses, this hose, with a nozzle at the end of that to capture the dust as it spins off of the blade when I'm cutting wood. So we need to also improve this. This is kind of wobbly, as you see. I need to stiffen that up, and I'm going to figure out how to do that on this project. So the first thing we're going to do is start by getting some material to close in the back and the bottom of the saw, and I have selected this 1/2-inch sanded plywood on both sides, and it is a good finish, so it's easy to work with, and I can finish it off and get it to be a nice smooth finish. It's also 1/2 inch thick, so it is thick enough and rigid enough so that it can do what I need it to do. So I'm going to just cut this down to size for each panel, and then we're going to go from there. Okay, so I removed the back outfeed table from the saw, and now I get really good access to under the cabinet or within the cabinet. So what I did was I basically unbolted the base with these 5/16 bolts, and I took my piece of board that I cut for the bottom, and I basically put it up under there and traced the holes, the bolt holes. So I'm going to go ahead and drill this on the drill press. And I'm going to, after it's drilled, screw it up or bolt it up to the bottom and sealing off the bottom. The other thing I did was the wires, the power cord to the motor, and I also removed the motor to get that out of the way, was inside the cabinet. So I have to deal with the leakage around that cord. So what I did was, to make it neater, I ran it on the outside of the cabinet, and I used a 1/2 inch pipe insulation, round foam pipe insulation, to encase the cord, and I also used it to seal the gap between the cabinet side and the table, So in other words, we want to make sure that we minimize the airflow leakage from within this compartment, so we get the full suction down through the blade and keeping the sawdust within the cabinet and then eventually into the vacuum. I'm going to use 1/2-inch pipe insulation, foam pipe insulation, to seal between the tabletop and the cabinet to ensure I have minimal leakage of vacuum. Okay, so we're at the drill press now. It's all set up with a 3/8 Forstner bit on it so that I can go ahead and drill the marked holes for the bolt pattern that I traced out on the saw. And what we're going to do is drill each one slowly and put a vacuum system on it so that it is not making a lot of mess. Here's the piece all ready to be sailed. I'm going to use some Watco Danish oil to seal it up. I don't want the sawdust to get in the grain or anything, so it's a good protective coating. You can see the bolt holes are all drilled. The center hole is cut out, and I inserted the fitting for the vacuum. I have a nice lip here. How I did that was I cut the hole in the wood, the diameter of this shaft diameter here, and this rim here, this little flange here, prevents it from coming out. I had, how I install it was I heated this up a little bit with a heat gun, and I got it soft enough so that I could then use a little persuasion and get it in the hole before it cooled. To install the panel, I went ahead and replaced the existing bolts that held the base of the saw to the legs to make them longer. These are 1-inch 5/16 bolts, and they were 1/2-inch bolts in there in place instead of these newer bolts. And I did this because to accommodate the thickness of the bottom panel we're going to be installing. So now when we bolt it up, we'll have enough length on the bolts to include the thickness of the bottom panel. Okay, here's the bottom panel bolted in place. The center drain, as you can see, is for the vacuum fitting. Here's the detail of the hose attached to the new fitting. And what I did was, because I didn't want to use the caulking, because I wasn't sure of the outcome, and I couldn't disassemble it. So what I did instead was I used the plastic vacuum fitting that I showed you, the coupling, and I tied to it, or I went around the shaft with a ferncoat fitting that I cut in half, and I put a clamp on it. This allowed me now to take the system apart if I need to. This ferncoat fitting is basically holding the coupling in place so that I can take off, attach and reattach this hose here without it moving. And it gives me also a seal for the vacuum inside of the box, which is right there. It doesn't move, and it's sealed. Now that we're closing the bottom of the saw, it's time to move on to closing in the back. And now we have to do some cutouts for the back to allow for the motor bracket to come outside the cabinet, the belt, and as well as this bracket. So what I did was I made my measurements, and I traced out the cutouts I have to do on the back panel, and as you see here, on a foam board, so that once I get it right, then I'm going to transfer it onto the actual panel here that I started to do and make sure that we get it all right before we start cutting the panel. Use the templates to trace out the pattern. So each half is going to fit together to form the back of the saw to completely close it in. Here's the piece cut out and fitted. So now I'm going to go ahead and install some magnets so that when I place the filler piece on the saw cabinet, it will adhere magnetically. So I went out and bought these Neo Diamium. They're about 12 millimeters in diameter, 3 millimeters thick. And I'm going to go ahead and mark out on my board the places I want to drill. I set up my drill press for a 1/2-inch bit, which is a little bit bigger than the 12 millimeters. I set the depth as well, a little bit below the depth of the surface of the wood, so that should be good. Okay, so we have them all finished. The pieces are sanded. The holes are drilled. I countersunk the holes counterbored them deep enough to make the magnets flush. Here are the magnets right here. They're neodymium magnets, very strong. So we're going to go ahead and glue them into each of these recessed holes I bored, and we're going to go from there. Here are the pieces all cut and sanded with the magnets installed. So you can see I even put some magnets on the sides, the edges where the pieces meet together to hold them in place. Came out pretty good. Just have to clean up some of the glue, residual, and we should be all set to install and seal these pieces. Here are the pieces installed on the back of the saw. You can see it's pretty much covering all the openings, and I left enough slack here, room, so that I can raise the blade up and down, and this motor tilts up and down with it, so we get plenty of room there. And it's a nice feature that you can just slide this piece out, snap back in place like this. Perfect. I improved the dust collection on top of the blade by basically putting in a more rigid system here by using a piece of ABS attached to my Fernco fitting and my knife gate here. So what this does for me is it makes it stiffer, and now I can position it right over the blade pretty close, move it out of the way like this, or put it right back in place.